Calvin McGraw opened the heavy sliding doors to his family's grain warehouse, only to find a fleet of gleaming SUVs parked wall-to-wall inside. He stood there, boots rooted in the dirt floor, arms slack at his sides, blinking like maybe the cold air had tricked his eyes. Chrome and polished paint gleamed under the pale light filtering through the high windows. BMWs, Range Rovers, even a G-Wagon or two, lined up neat as pins like the place had been converted into a luxury car showroom overnight. The sharp scent of motor oil and synthetic air freshener floated in the air, clashing with the dusty smell of grain and old plywood. Calvin's gaze swept the room slowly, settling on a bright vinyl banner hanging from the rafters. Willow Creek, Spring Gala, Overflow Parking. For a long moment, he didn't move. His breath left a faint cloud in the morning chill, and his eyes drifted toward the back wall, where his father's old office sat like a quiet witness. There, behind the smudged window pane, he could just make out the framed letter his father wrote decades ago, the one that ended with the line he'd memorized as a boy. "We plant more than seeds. We plant pride." Pride was hard to feel standing in a barn full of someone else's exhaust. He turned and walked out without a word, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The air outside was crisp, the horizon already painted with the pink hue of morning. From across the fence, old Joe raised a mug of coffee in greeting. His wife Mabel gave a cheerful wave from her rocker on the porch. Calvin forced a half smile and tipped his hat, though his thoughts were miles away, mostly circling around the word how. He didn't have to wait long for an answer. A black Lexus SUV rolled into the drive like it owned the place. Out stepped Karen Hensley, HOA president of Willow Creek Estates, dressed in tailored denim, a silk scarf, and that signature smirk she wore like a badge. She was flanked by two clipboard-wielding assistants who looked more like wedding planners than community volunteers. "Good morning, Mr. McGraw," Karen called out, glancing at her phone, not even making eye contact. "Hope you don't mind. We had a little spillover with parking for the spring gala. Your building is so rustic. It fit the theme perfectly." Calvin's mouth tightened. "You parked $50,000 worth of leather-trimmed SUVs in my grain barn." She finally looked up, blinking as if surprised by the tone. "Oh, Calvin, don't be dramatic. It's just for the weekend. The Community Enhancement Committee approved it." She waved a paper in the air like it was a magic wand. "We figured, why waste good space?" He held out his hand. "Let me see it." Karen stepped closer and handed him a sheet of paper with a flourish. It looked official, logo, watermark, even his name typed at the bottom. But where a signature should have been, there was only a blank line. Calvin's eyes narrowed. "I didn't sign this," he said flatly. "Probably just an oversight," she said with a shrug. "You know how these forms go. Lots of pages, lots of people. Besides, you weren't using the space yet, right? Thought you'd be neighborly." He folded the paper slowly and handed it back. "Neighborly," he echoed. Karen laughed lightly. "We trust you more than any parking lot in town, Calvin. You should be flattered." He looked at her, face unreadable. "Trust ends where my gates begin." Karen's smile faltered just enough to be noticeable. One of her assistants shifted uncomfortably and glanced toward the cars. Without another word, Calvin turned and started walking toward the farmhouse, hands in his coat pockets, mind already moving faster than his feet. As he passed the tool shed, something caught his eye, a shape half lost to rust and winter grime. The old bulldozer sat quietly under the lean-to, its engine silent for months now. He stopped beside it, resting a hand on the metal frame. The seat was still there, worn smooth by years of planting and clearing. The ignition key, somehow, still hung from a bent hook on the dash. He stared at it for a long time, the morning wind tugging at his coat like a whisper. As Calvin walked back toward the house, he passed the rusted old bulldozer parked by the tool shed and paused. Under dim lights at the old post office turned HOA headquarters, Calvin walks in like a polite stranger. But he's there on a mission. The building still had its original bones, arched windows, tiled floor scuffed from decades of boots, but now it was covered in sleek laminate panels and framed motivational posters. Someone had set out a table with glossy brochures and a plastic tray of stale cookies. A faint hum came from the vending machine in the corner. The air carried the scent of old paper trying to mask itself under cheap vanilla air freshener. Calvin moved slowly, his steps deliberate. In his coat pocket, folded and refolded until the edges curled, was a letter his father had typed on an old Smith Corona. He thumbed the crease as he waited at the sign-in table, reading the last line again in his mind. When someone steps on your land, they're stepping on your story. His name was already printed on the visitor log. Someone had expected him. Mr. McGraw, a cheerful voice rang out. Karen Hensley walked over, smiling like she was hosting a charity auction. She wore a bright scarf and the kind of lipstick that signaled she expected a camera crew. Glad you could stop by. Did you try the brownies? They're store-bought, but no one needs to know. Calvin glanced at the tray, then shook her hand briefly. Just wanted to ask a few questions about that permit you showed me. Karen's smile didn't falter. Oh, the warehouse issue. You're still thinking about that? Honestly, I thought it was settled. Temporary use only. Community benefit, all very standard. Standard usually includes a real signature, he said quietly. Karen waved a manicured hand. Oh, Calvin, don't make this a thing. No one's trying to hurt you. We just needed space. And frankly, your barn is closer than the municipal lot. Her voice dropped slightly, becoming more performative as two board members approached from down the hall. Let's not forget the big picture, she said louder, gesturing to the walls. Community enhancement, shared resources. Willow Creek can be a model neighborhood, and we're just getting started. Calvin nodded slowly, pretending to admire the wall displays. Renderings of pocket parks, bike lanes, proposed commercial kiosks along the highway. His eyes paused on a map with color-coded overlays, yellow, red, and a new shade of green that wasn't there last time he'd checked the zoning board website. His property was shaded green. Any chance I could get a copy of that? He asked, tapping the corner of the map. Karen smiled wider, but her eyes narrowed a fraction. We're still finalizing that draft, but sure, I'll email you something. He nodded, thanked her, then turned toward the hallway. On his way out, someone touched his sleeve. It was Rob, the HOA vice president, standing half in the shadows, tie loosened, forehead glistening under fluorescent lights. Hey, he murmured. Got a minute? Calvin nodded, and they stepped into a narrow utility corridor lined with supply cabinets and broken printers. She's been pushing this rezoning for months, Rob whispered, checking over his shoulder. Your barn, the land behind it, even the fence line that butts up to Willow Creek's back trail. She wants to rezone the whole strip. You're just the first domino. Calvin's face stayed neutral. That's so. Rob looked pained. She's got people on the county board, friends. They're fast-tracking the applications. Why tell me? Because I grew up on a farm, too, Rob said quietly. 2 counties over. We lost it after an annexation deal. No one told my dad until it was done. For a long second, they stood there in silence, broken only by the hiss of a distant HVAC vent. Back outside, Calvin walked past the town diner where Dot waved from behind the counter, holding up a small white box. He stepped inside just long enough to hear her say, "Tart's still warm." And Calvin, don't let them rewrite your boundaries. She handed him the box and a folded napkin with a wink. Back at the farm, the barn office felt colder than usual. He set the cherry tart on the desk and reached for the top shelf where his father's old records were stored. Dust puffed into the air as he opened the worn cabinet. In the back, wrapped in the same cloth his mother used to fold into his father's lunch pail, was a manila folder. Inside, yellowed papers clung to each other. Property deeds, faded surveys, letters from the zoning commission dating back to 1983. At the bottom, a typed page stood out, dated April 4th, 1986. The lines were crisp. His father's voice rang clear. "A town that forgets its farmers forgets its food." Calvin read the line twice. Then he walked to the corkboard on the wall, grabbed a red pen from the drawer, and underlined a specific clause in the county ordinance he'd tacked up earlier that winter. Unauthorized vehicles on agricultural land may be declared trespassing after 48 hours. He circled the date. March 15th. 48 hours begins. "Technically," Sheriff Tom said, sipping his diner coffee, "if it's still there in 48 hours, it's yours to tow." The words hung in the air between sips and silverware. Morning chatter filled Dot's diner. Eggs sizzling, toast popping, the low hum of a local radio station playing Merle Haggard. Calvin sat across from Tom in their usual corner booth, the leather cracked and patched with tape. Tom stirred his coffee like a man without urgency, but his eyes were sharp above the rim of the mug. Across the room, Billy leaned against the counter, recording B-roll on his phone for what he called the evidence folder. He zoomed in on Calvin's face, then panned slowly to the sheriff, adding a caption in his head. The moment everything changed. "You think that bulldozer still runs?" Billy called over, smirking. Calvin didn't look up. "We're about to find out." Outside, the wind had a wet bite to it. The air smelled of damp earth and tree pollen, and the clouds were dragging their heels across the sky like reluctant sheep. Spring was coming fast, and everyone in Elkhorn Junction could feel it. At the sheriff's office an hour later, Tom pulled out a tattered copy of the county ordinances. He laid it flat on the counter between them, pointing to a clause with a calloused finger. "See that? Vehicles left on agricultural land without the owner's consent after 48 hours are considered obstruction. If they interfere with seasonal activity, you can file for immediate removal." He pulled out a highlighter and traced the margin. "And that includes planting prep. Your barn qualifies." Calvin nodded, already thinking ahead. "Can you back me up?" "I'll do better than that," Tom said. "I'll make sure it's on the record." By midday, Calvin was pacing the warehouse floor with a notepad and a GoPro strapped to his chest. Billy followed him with a DSLR camera, documenting each vehicle. They logged every plate, took time-stamped photos of oil spots, tire treads, even snapped a shot of a woman in heels unloading wine cases into a white Escalade. Billy narrated quietly as he filmed. "Day 1 of illegal parking. HOA thinks they're untouchable. They're wrong." That afternoon, a dusty red tow truck rumbled into the driveway, followed by a lime green rollback with Rosie's Recovery scrawled in stylized letters across the side. Rosie stepped down from the cab, her braid tucked under a camo ball cap. Earl followed behind, big as a barn and twice as loud. "Calvin," Rosie called, tossing him a greasy rag like it was a handshake. "Heard you're fixin' to give the HOA a heart attack." "We're warming up," Calvin said. "You two ready if this goes through?" Earl grinned. "We'll be parked over that ridge by tomorrow morning. Keys in the ignition, engines cold. You say the word, we roll." Rosie tapped her phone. "And I've got 3 more drivers on call. Just say when." That evening, Mabel and Joe stopped by with a mason jar of fresh cornmeal and a small cloth bag tied with twine. "It's blue corn," Mabel explained. "Heirloom seed from my granddaddy's field. We figured you'd know what to do with it." Calvin took the pouch with quiet reverence. "I do." As night fell, Calvin tucked the seed into the same drawer where he kept his father's old papers. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the Willow Creek clubhouse. The HOA meeting was already in full swing. Folding chairs lined the faux marble floor, and Karen stood at the front like a pageant queen in a power suit. She was mid-sentence when Calvin entered, talking about beautification efforts and expanded community outreach. "Well, if it isn't Farmer McGraw," she said, voice carrying across the room. "Here to offer up your barn as a permanent parking annex?" The room chuckled politely. Calvin didn't. "I just wanted to thank the board," he said calmly, "for helping me understand the permit process. I've learned a lot this week." Karen tilted her head. "See? That's the spirit. Farmers make good neighbors, but terrible board members." More chuckles. Calvin smiled faintly, nodded, and turned to leave. As he stepped through the door, a hand caught his arm. Rob, eyes darting nervously, slipped a folded paper into Calvin's palm. "I shouldn't," he whispered, "but you'll need it." Back at the farm, Calvin sat at his kitchen table, unfolding the printout under the dim glow of the old ceiling bulb. It was a quarterly budget, HOA expenditures, line by line. There, under event enhancements, was Karen's name, vendor payments, inflated invoices, catering charges for executive meetings at out-of-town restaurants. He folded the page, slid it into his folder, and walked out to the yard. The wind had died down, and the night was still. Stars blinked overhead like cautious witnesses. Calvin approached the tool shed where the old bulldozer waited in the dark. He climbed up into the seat, brushed off the dust, and turned the key. The engine coughed, once, then again, and then it growled to life. At sunrise, Calvin McGraw drives the rusty bulldozer to the warehouse gate, parks it sideways, and climbs down without a word. The old machine rumbled low as it settled into position, blocking the wide gravel entrance with the same quiet defiance as a rancher closing a gate. The mist rolled across the yard in soft waves, brushing against Calvin's boots as he stepped down, the metal still warm from the short drive. He gave the bulldozer's frame a gentle pat, then reached into his jacket and ran a thumb along the folded napkin in his pocket. Inside it, the letter from his father, its edges worn, the words still legible if you squinted. He didn't need to. The line he came back to was etched in memory. Beyond the fence, bright white tents flapped in the breeze. HOA workers bustled between tables, draped in pastel linens, stringing up balloons, adjusting centerpieces. A banner stretched across the side of the warehouse read, "Willow Creek Spring Gala, celebrating our future." They hadn't noticed the new addition to the landscape. Not yet. Sheriff Tom pulled up in his pickup just as the dew was beginning to burn off the grass. He stepped out slowly, wearing his usual leather vest and a calm look that said he knew exactly how this would play out. "Morning," he said, joining Calvin at the fence line. Calvin nodded. "You checked the time?" "Got about 12 hours left," Tom replied, taking a sip from a thermos. "Then it's yours to clean up." A low whistle caught their attention. Billy stood across the drive, camera already rolling, a half-eaten muffin in one hand. "You sure you don't want a speech or something?" he joked. "Maybe wave a flag?" "This is the flag," Calvin muttered, eyes on the bulldozer. They didn't have to wait long. Karen arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by her usual clipboard-wielding entourage. Her heels clicked sharply across the gravel, jaw set like she was heading into court. She stopped short when she saw the machine. "What is this?" she snapped, arms thrown wide. "Line in the dirt," Calvin answered. "This is public obstruction," she shouted. "We have a scheduled event, approved by the HOA and the community board." Calvin didn't blink. "It's private land." She turned to Sheriff Tom, hoping for backup. "This is harassment. I'll have him fined." Tom lifted his thermos in greeting. "You've got 12 hours left, Miss Hensley, then we're on county clock." Karen looked around as if waiting for someone to tell her this wasn't happening. But no one stepped forward. Her assistant shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact. A few HOA volunteers fidgeted by the catering table. One dropped a tray of plastic champagne flutes. Billy panned his camera slowly. "You're live," he said to no one in particular. By mid-morning, more folks began to arrive. Mabel and Joe rolled in with lawn chairs and a checkered blanket, setting up under the old sycamore by the road. Mabel handed Calvin a thermos of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "It's egg salad," she said gently. "You need fuel to hold a line." Others followed, retired teachers, mechanics, a handful of farmers still in coveralls. They didn't shout or wave signs. They just sat, watching. Some nodded to Calvin. A few brought binoculars like it was the 4th of July parade. Karen pushed forward, ignoring them all. She stormed toward the small stage set up at the side of the tent, grabbed the microphone from its stand, and tapped it with manic energy. The speakers screeched before leveling out. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with forced cheer, "it seems one of our neighbors has taken it upon himself to decorate today's event with construction equipment." A few strained chuckles. Now, I know some folks think resistance is quaint, but let's be honest, Calvin McGraw is a bitter man with a broken tractor. Calvin stepped forward slowly, raising the cloth napkin from his pocket, unfolding it with quiet precision. "It runs just fine." There was a silence then, longer than any speech could stretch. The crowd didn't cheer, but something settled into place. A shift in the air. People crossed their arms, leaned forward, tilted their heads like they were finally seeing the truth behind the banners. Karen blinked twice. Her grip on the mic faltered. Rob stood behind the stage, barely visible. He didn't move, didn't speak. But he didn't stop what was coming either. As the clock crept toward its mark, the quiet was broken by a low rumble from beyond the ridge. Engines, big ones. Rosie's lime green tow truck led the charge, followed by Earl's red rig and 3 more trucks, dust pluming behind them like a rolling curtain call. As the clock nears 48 hours, a low rumble sounds from beyond the ridge. Tow trucks. The first flatbed truck crests the hill like a cavalry horse, chains swinging, diesel engine growling. It rolled through the morning haze like something out of an old western, sunlight glinting off the chrome grille, Rosie's lime green logo unmistakable on the side. Behind her, Earl's red beast followed close, and then came 3 more rigs, fanned out in formation, kicking up dust that painted the sky in amber streaks. Their engines echoed across the hills like a warning. Something was about to change. Down in the warehouse yard, Billy caught it all on camera, his phone rig strapped to his chest, lips moving silently as he monitored the live stream. From the diner radio perched on a folding chair nearby, Dot's voice crackled over the airwaves. "Some folks are about to learn what happens when you park where you don't belong." The crowd had doubled since dawn. Folding chairs now stretched 3 rows deep near the road. Mabel passed out lemonade in mason jars, while Joe fanned his hat in slow circles. Children perched on hay bales, feet swinging. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a spectacle. Sheriff Tom stood near the warehouse entrance with a clipboard tucked under his arm, hat tilted low. He barely acknowledged the trucks, save for a nod toward Rosie as she rumbled past. Calvin didn't move. He stood beside the bulldozer, arms crossed, eyes steady. His silence gave the moment weight. It wasn't anger, not even satisfaction, just the resolve of someone who had waited long enough. The first SUV, a pearl-white Mercedes, was winched onto Rosie's flatbed with practiced ease. She adjusted the straps, tapped the side with her boot, and moved on. Behind her, Earl grinned like a man in his element, hauling a Lexus with gold trim that looked painfully out of place on his scratched-up deck. Karen arrived just in time to see her plans unravel. She came rushing down the path in heels that weren't made for gravel, her dress catching wind like a flag too proud to lower. "Stop them!" she shouted, arms waving. "This is HOA property. This is theft." Rosie didn't blink. She kept the cable taut, winch spinning slowly. The truck's engine hummed louder than Karen's protests. Karen lunged toward the cab. Sheriff Tom stepped between them, voice low but unshakable. "Ma'am, you're interfering with a lawful removal. I suggest you step back." She looked at him, blinking like she didn't recognize him. "You can't do this. These are guests. This is our event." Tom unfolded a document from his clipboard, held it out. 48-hour trespass enforcement. Vehicles left without consent. We're following county code. Karen tried to grab the paper. Tom stepped back. "You're free to call your lawyer, but I'd suggest doing it from over there." The crowd murmured. Billy's camera panned slowly as Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. Her eyes darted around, searching for allies. But her assistants had vanished behind the catering tent, and most of the HOA board members were now pretending to be very interested in the flower arrangements. Then came the Range Rover. It was black, spotless, parked dead center like a crown jewel. Rosie backed up, chains in hand, slow and deliberate. Karen's scream cracked the morning quiet. "No, not that one. Absolutely not that one." She rushed toward the vehicle, but this time it was Rob who stopped her. He didn't speak. He just held out a folder, thick, heavy, official-looking. Calvin recognized the budget report immediately. Karen froze. A voice behind them called out, "Calvin!" "Got a minute?" A reporter stood near the road, microphone in hand, cameraman beside her. Local news, judging by the windbreaker with the station logo. Calvin walked over slowly. "Morning," he said. "We've been following this story," she began. "What do you want people to take away from what's happening here today?" He looked past her, toward the tow trucks, toward the bulldozer, toward the crowd that had shown up without being asked. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about respect. That warehouse is part of my work, my family, my name. And it was taken without so much as a knock on the door. We don't do that out here, not to neighbors." The reporter nodded, her face softening. "Thank you." Behind them, Sheriff Tom raised his voice for the first time. "Just to be clear," he said to the gathered press, "we've initiated a preliminary investigation into misuse of HOA funds. County and state authorities have been notified." There was a ripple in the crowd. People leaned forward. A few gasped. Cameras clicked. Karen stumbled backward, mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Her heel caught a stone, snapping with a dry crack. She sat down hard on the gravel, legs folded awkwardly beneath her. Her dress, once crisp, now bore streaks of dust. Earl gave a low whistle. "That's a first." Rosie finished tightening the straps on the Range Rover. She stepped back, gave a small salute toward the crowd, then looked at the final vehicle. Karen's golf cart. It was pink, embroidered seat covers, a ridiculous hood ornament shaped like a flamingo. She hadn't driven it today, but someone had parked it right beside the guest registration table. Rosie climbed into the truck, backed up slowly. Karen watched, lips trembling. "No," she whispered. "That's mine." From behind the camera, Billy leaned in close to the mic. "That one's for Dot. The warehouse smells like grain again, not perfume or car exhaust." The first delivery truck backs in as Calvin watches from the porch. The thrum of the engine was steady, comforting. Dust rose gently as the driver eased back through the wide entrance, and Calvin could already hear the rhythmic clatter of grain hitting the floor inside. It was the kind of sound that didn't make headlines or speeches, but meant something real, the kind of sound you could build a life around. The farm was quiet now. No banners, no balloon arches, just wind moving through the grass and a distant hum of early-season bees. Calvin leaned against the porch railing, coffee in hand, eyes tracking the truck's slow reverse, like a man watching something sacred return. Out by the mailbox, Billy knelt beside a small patch of freshly turned soil. He held a pouch in one hand, tied with twine, the faded cloth showing hints of blue where heirloom corn seeds waited. He planted the first row with care, pressing each kernel deep and covering it gently. "You think they'll take?" he asked without looking up. Calvin took a sip of coffee. "Let's see if the old seed still knows this dirt." The blue corn had waited long enough. So had the town. Inside the house, Calvin placed his father's letter back in its envelope and walked it to the old filing cabinet in the den. He opened the bottom drawer, reached past a stack of farm records, and set it gently into a small wooden box with a label burned into the side. Legacy. Outside, a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Mabel and Joe stepped out, arms full. Mabel carried a pie, still warm, while Joe balanced a six-pack of root beer and a folded picnic blanket. "Don't worry," Mabel said with a grin. "We brought forks this time." They joined Calvin on the porch. Sheriff Tom arrived a few minutes later, hat in hand, jacket unzipped, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. He sat on the porch swing, sighed once, and said, "It's a good thing I never liked golf carts anyway." Billy came up from the field, brushing dirt off his jeans. "We're already getting comments on the recap video," he said, pulling out his phone. "One guy wants to donate lumber, another offered a drone, and Dot says the diner's doing record pie sales." Calvin chuckled. "Tell Dot I want a commission." "No need," said Mabel, handing him a slice. "Consider this your dividend." By mid-afternoon, the town felt like itself again. Rosie drove by honking twice, her truck bed now empty except for the infamous pink golf cart, which she piloted like a parade queen. The flamingo hood ornament bobbed with each bump in the road. The old clubhouse had gone quiet. Karen's house sat dark and empty. Word was she'd put it on the market and taken off to Arizona. No one seemed eager to confirm it. The new interim board from Willow Creek hadn't said much, and folks were fine with that. Sometimes silence meant progress. Calvin walked the perimeter of the barn just before dusk, checking the locks, watching the wind ripple through the planted rows. He stopped by the side entrance where someone had pinned a folded card to the gate. He opened it. Inside were over 40 signatures. At the top, in plain handwriting, it read, "Thanks for reminding us who we are." He stood there for a long moment, reading each name, recognizing them all. People he'd worked beside, argued with, grown up next to. Their gratitude felt heavier than any fine or ordinance. Back on the porch, Billy set down a notepad filled with sketches and rough measurements. "Greenhouse goes over the west plot," he said. "Plenty of light. We can frame it with cedar. I found plans online." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "You thinking summer?" Billy leaned back, grinning. "Next season, we build a greenhouse." Calvin looked at the warehouse, then back at Billy. "With a bulldozer?" Billy grins. "With a bulldozer?" The barn is quiet now, but its walls remember. Grain once again fills the air, not the scent of strangers or stolen space. Calvin didn't win with noise, but with patience, truth, and the kind of dignity that runs deep in the soil. In small towns, boundaries aren't just fences. They're stories passed down like seed from one hand to the next. And when neighbors stand together, even the loudest voices of power can't drown out the steady hum of decency. Some victories don't need banners. They bloom slowly, row by row, like blue corn in spring.